Your Creative Push, episode 257.
Always go back to that thing that got you interested in the first place. What it is about art that you like doing.
Welcome to Your Creative Push, the podcast that pushes you to pursue your creative passions. I'm your host, Youngman Brown, and my guest today is Scott Listfield. Now, something that you might not know about me is that when I was a little boy, I wanted to be an archaeologist, and ever since, I've been obsessed with dinosaurs. That's why Jurassic Park is my favorite movie of all time. And later in life, I got really into outer space, as a lot of you actually do know. So now a part of me wishes that I wanted to be an astronaut and that I had kind of fulfilled that desire. But that is why I am so excited to have Scott Listfield on the show, because he is a guy that only paints astronauts and dinosaurs. His paintings are awesome, and they always incorporate this astronaut that is kind of exploring these odd, unique, and often funny worlds. These Earth-like landscapes that include McDonald's signs and all kinds of other pop culture and corporate logos. And he gets into all of that in this episode, as well as how that entire kind of project started. Scott also dives deep into the fact that he never really expected these astronaut paintings to last as his subject matter for so long. And he talks about how and when inspiration strikes him for these paintings. He talks about the obligation that he sometimes feels to cover current political issues, especially in today's very kind of divided, should I say, political climate. And then diving into resistances and his work process, he talks about the importance of getting out of your everyday routine if you are lacking inspiration, and his daily struggle of not having enough time in the day to do everything that he wants to do. He talks about how he was nervous about running out of ideas once he became a full-time artist, and then the reality of that situation once he finally did make the decision to become a full-time artist. He shares his advice for balancing a full-time job with your own personal artwork and also building a routine out of your creative passion. I had such a great time talking with Scott. He's such a thoughtful, funny guy, and I know that you're going to enjoy my conversation with him, especially if you are somebody who is perhaps scared to do the thing that you are most passionate about and you're afraid that other people will not understand or other people will not latch on. So please do enjoy my conversation with Scott Listfield. Scott, welcome to Your Creative Push.
Thanks for having me.
Man, thanks for being here. So we like to start out on the show by giving you an opportunity to give kind of a brief bio, sort of how you got to the point you are today in your creative and artistic career.
Sure, I can do that. I can give you the well, we'll see. I mean, I could fill your whole podcast here with just my ramblings of my back history, but I'll try to keep it relatively brief. For those of your listeners who don't know who I am, my name is Scott Listfield. I paint astronauts. I could just end it right there, and we could all go home, and that would
done. Thank you, Scott, for coming on the show today.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure. So I paint astronauts, and usually when people ask me what I do, I say I paint astronauts. When I meet people in person, and then I gauge by the look on their face whether they really want to learn more than that or not.
And sometimes dinosaurs.
And sometimes dinosaurs. My official artist statement says I paint astronauts and sometimes dinosaurs. I've gotten a little bit of crap from some of my fans online because I don't paint dinosaurs all that much anymore. Mm-hmm. And every once in a while I'll get a message like, hey, you said sometimes dinosaurs. What does sometimes mean? But yeah, sometimes I paint dinosaurs. I should probably do it more often. So I'll just sort of tell you a little bit of my story, and you feel free to jump in. I mean, I don't need to be just me rambling on and on and on forever. Yeah. So if you have any pointed questions, feel free to jump in at any point. Like pretty much anybody my age, or maybe anybody, the very first thing I remember wanting to do when I grow up was be an astronaut.
Nice.
Yeah. I feel like that served as the basis for my childhood, even though I very quickly realized that I get kind of queasy on like kiddie level carousels. So I think I realized pretty early on that actually being an astronaut probably wasn't in the cards for me. But that idea has sort of stuck with me. So I wanted to be an astronaut. And then, while I was growing up, I showed a very early interest in drawing, or more specifically doodling, I guess. Drawing little cartoon pigs and things like that. It was just something I sort of always did. And it was a little bit of a mystery to my parents because neither of them are artists and neither of them are really that into art. I found out later in life that I do have some, I've got aunts and uncles and cousins further afield who are very interested in art. But nobody in my nuclear family was all that into it. So it was a little bit of a mystery. But they always encouraged me to sort of, continue to draw. But all through high school, I guess, I drew, and I was one of those kids who hung out in the art room in high school. I guess you can draw the line in the sand. I was one of those kids who was always in the art room, but I was not one of those kids who was in the art room to buy drugs. I was in there to actually do art. There seemed to be like two camps there.
Yeah.
So I was always doing art, but it was at no point, through age 18 or so, did I ever consider it anything even remotely serious. I think I maybe thought maybe I'd go into cartooning because I was into cartoons. I grew up in the era where, of Beavis and Butthead and Ren and Stimpy and, Liquid Television and MTV. So I was interested in that kind of thing, but I don't know that it ever crossed my mind that could be a career or anything. So I went off to college. I went to Dartmouth College in New Hampshire, which is pretty well known for being a decent liberal arts school and maybe not so well known for being an art school, which is fine. That was not really what I intended to do. But I got there and I was picking my classes and I couldn't remember in a time in my life where I didn't do art. And the thought of taking a bunch of classes, even classes I was interested in, but the thought of taking a bunch of classes, none of which were art, sounded very depressing to me. So I made sure I got into an intro drawing class.
Were you declared? Like, did you declare a major?
No,
that?
I didn't have to. At where I went to school, we didn't have to declare majors until like the end of sophomore year. It was very sort of loose, so I literally had no idea what I was going to do.
But you just wanted to make sure that art was sprinkled in.
Yeah, I wanted to make sure art was sprinkled in. I took a sort of variety of classes, including a bunch of things I'd never taken before, just to sort of see what I liked.
Yeah, that's a really good strategy, I think, for young people to dabble in a bunch of things and make sure that you have that base there, yeah.
A lot of people I know now went to art school. I did art programs. But going to a liberal arts school, I think, was actually really good in that it allowed me to try a bunch of different things without really forcing my hand, which at 18, I had no idea what I was doing in life at 18, like no clue at all. So that worked out pretty well. So I went to my first art class and they they said, here's your material list. And, we're working with charcoal and vine charcoal and, black chalk and big pieces of paper and things that were otherwise, what I considered sort of adult art supplies. And I had literally been using crayons and markers and things up until the summer before. And so I was pretty much terrible. And I felt in very much over my head. I was looking around, everybody seemed really good. Everyone's, drawing with charcoal, and I had no idea how to even like render a thing. Art in high school for me was a lot of fun, but it was just sort of, here's some materials, do whatever you want. And so I felt very confused and lost and a little overwhelmed for a while. We'd have an assignment. We did still life, and I'd done, a little bit of still life, but it was not really anything I'd done before. So I sort of fumbled through class for the first third of the semester or so. And then I realized one day, I came in to the art building one day, like relatively late at night, the night before a class, and it never even occurred to me, but there were people there hanging out like all night long doing their drawings, or not even the night before class. It seemed stupid, but I was like, oh, well, of course people are here all the time drawing. I don't have to just do my assignment. They were there kind of, living art, being much more involved with it than I had been. And so at that point I was like, oh, okay, this is like, the art school I know in high school. This is something I should take a little more seriously than I'd been taking it. And so I got in there and I had a real turnaround in that very first semester of drawing. And by the end of the semester, I was doing stuff that, in hindsight was pretty terrible, but at the time I felt proud of it at least. And I felt like not that it was a competition, but I felt like I could hold my own with some of these other students who, just seemed so far ahead of me at the beginning of class.
And do you think that was because you were putting more time in, or because you were taking it more seriously, or because you were getting to know other people? Like, what do you attribute that like turnaround to?
Definitely all the above.
Yeah.
It was no longer just sort of a fun, like I always considered art like a fun thing.
So it wasn't
And
dabbling anymore.
no, it wasn't dabbling. It was like, this is a serious class. Like, like, I mean, I guess people do that in college all the time. It's like, oh, I'm not here. I mean, you are kind of in college to have fun, but you're not here just to have fun. Like, classes are serious. I should take it seriously. But it was also all the other things. Like, there was this community there, and they took it seriously, and I sort of took cues from that, and I just got I got a little more comfortable with the materials and everything else. Using charcoal or whatever to draw. So by the end of this first class, I was like, I'm going to be an art major. By the end of my first year in school, my freshman year, I was like, this is, something I'm going to be very serious about. And the following fall, my sophomore year, I took my first painting class, and I'm sure people change their mind on these things all the time. But at that point I said, I think painting is what I'm going to do for, my career, my life. This is what I want to do with myself. And I ended up graduating from a little art school with a degree in studio art, which unsurprisingly did not have employers lining up around the block to hire me to do much of anything. And I wasn't really, to be honest, I wasn't totally sure what I wanted to do with my future anyways. I grew up in a generation, maybe it's still like this, but where my teachers suggested that teachers who were great, by the way, but they all suggested that I move to New York for a year or two, rent a warehouse space for the equivalent of $7 a month, make lots of paintings, and then literally they said you can be like a furniture mover during the day or whatever, and that's how you can pay your bills. You haven't met me in person, and for all your listeners who don't know who I am, furniture mover. I'm 5'7" and weigh about 130 pounds soaking wet. So furniture mover was not an ideal profession for me. I attempted to move to New York, failed miserably, as many do, because it was about 1,000 million times more expensive and harder to just to get by than when my professors had done it, 30 something years ago. That sort of lifestyle just didn't exist anymore, where you can find a cheap warehouse space in somewhere in Brooklyn or whatever and make do. It just didn't exist. I had in my last year of college and a little bit thereafter, the sort of 6 months after I graduated college, I lived abroad a lot. I spent some time studying in Italy while I was in college, and then I lived in Australia, in Sydney, Australia, for about 6 months or so after I graduated college. And then I came home and I tried to move to New York, and I failed. And I ended up living back with my parents in the suburbs of Boston. And I just sort of felt like, to use an astronaut metaphor, I felt like my rocket had just kind of fizzled out and plummeted back to Earth. I had kind of no idea what I was doing. I had kind of decided that I wanted to get a full-time job, and my options were either go into graphic design, which felt related to art, even though I didn't know much about it, or go into sort of gallery and museum work. And I decided that pursuing design was something I wanted to do because it felt sort of creative, and I liked it, and the skills seemed to translate from art. So I ended up living at home and taking some classes, and eventually I found a very entry-level job in Boston. I liken it to the flipping burgers equivalent of graphic design, just entry level. And so I at least I moved out of my parents' house, and I found it, the Boston's smallest studio apartment, and I was living on my own. And for the first time I was, adulting. I'm air quoting here. I was adulting. Only I still had no idea what the heck I was doing. I was living in a place where, I was, cooking ramen noodles on a stove, like a little hot plate, because I had no stove. I just had like a dorm fridge. My shower was literally in a closet. The bathroom was around the corner. It was a weird apartment. I was taking the bus to work every day, spending a lot of time in the laundromat, just sitting there waiting for my clothes to dry, watching telenovelas. And at the same time, I had been thinking a lot about how, after spending much of the last year living abroad, where you quickly sort of get used to this idea where I'm not from here. Every time you leave the house, you feel a little bit like an alien. Like, this is not my culture. This is not my language. This is not where I'm from. I kind of assumed once I moved back home that feeling would sort of just go away. I'd be back home. things would be back to normal. And I was very surprised to find that not only did it not go away, it felt just as strong. I remember going to the supermarket and just all I wanted was just sort of a box of cookies or something. And there was an aisle, this is like endless aisle full of options for Oreos, right? You can get the Halloween orange Oreos, you can get the double stuffed Oreos, you can get the ultra thin Oreos, you can get the peanut butter Oreos, you can get the seasonal Oreos, you can get the mint Oreos. It was like an overload of American pop culture. Like I just couldn't deal with that. I also, after spending spending some time at college in the 90s, I didn't have a TV. The internet was kind of barely a thing. So I was now living on my own with a television. I was watching a ridiculous amount of like reality TV and whatever was going on MTV at the time and cable television. And so I just felt like I'd just been tossed in the deep end of American pop culture and didn't feel at home or comfortable. And I was also working full time really for the first time in my life, for full time, having to pay bills and everything, which I guess, is a fortunate statement to make, but that's kind of where I know that, that was lucky for me to be in that position. But it was still just it was just all very confusing and new, and I felt very alien to all of it. And so around this time, I started thinking about making some paintings that I thought of as little short stories about just how weird the contemporary world felt to me at the time, and how disconnected I felt from it, and how I felt like I was exploring this world as kind of as somebody who didn't really belong in it. And I knew I wanted to have a protagonist who would appear in each one of these paintings as sort of a constant. And I was the guy in college who painted nothing but self-portraits. Everybody in art school knows one of those guys. They're usually weird and creepy, or girls. They just have walls and walls of self-portraits, and you're like, oh, that person's weird. That was me. I was that weird person. And I realized that those paintings were all very, very inward-looking. And now that I had seen a lot of the world and was out in the world myself, I didn't want to do that anymore. I didn't want to make paintings that were just about myself. I wanted to make paintings that were really much more about the world. And so I didn't want to cast myself in all these paintings. And so this was right around the year 2001. People had been, for those of you old enough to remember it, people had been freaking out about Y2K. Like, it was just a weird time to be alive. A lot was changing. I guess it's always a weird time to be alive. But
right.
It really felt like, oh, the future's happening now. So I remember one night, all these ideas were in my head, in my little studio apartment with my then girlfriend, who's now my wife. We used to do this thing called renting movies from places called Blockbuster. So we rented 2001, A Space Odyssey, the Stanley Kubrick film. And I'd never seen it before. And it's an amazing movie. It's a very weird movie. But what struck me watching this film was how strange it was that that's what people I think it came out in like 1969, 68, something like that era. That's what people thought the future was going to be like. And here I was in the real 2001, and that version of 2001 still looked just as futuristic. And right at that moment, I kind of realized my whole life growing up, I kind of assumed I'd grow up into this future, this 21st century. The future was always the 21st century. And I thought I'd be living on the moon, and I thought I'd have a robot best friend, and I thought we'd have flying cars and jetpacks and all this cool crap. And meanwhile, I'm eating, single serve Uno's pizza off of my hot plate, while going to the laundromat and taking the bus to work, and all these just sort of mundane, everyday things that were not the future I kind of thought we'd get. And so right in that moment, I realized that the protagonist I wanted in my paintings was that astronaut from the fictional 2001, the one I wanted to be when I was a kid, the one I thought I was going to grow up into being. That astronaut, I wanted him or her to be the person who would be exploring in all my paintings. And so I started painting astronauts pretty much right thereafter. It was this weird revelation. I can, if you have any questions, you can jump in now. If you want, I can start talking about how my how I built an art career from there.
Yeah, well, I do have a question.
Sure.
This whole renting a movie thing you mentioned, how did that happen? Like you get a movie and then you give it back, and it's like a digital copy of it, or
it's super
what
weird.
do you mean?
I know it's hard for people to understand. There used to be these things called CDs that were on these little discs of plastic, and before that they were VHS, were these like cartridges of plastic. And you would go to
you say?
It's like a cartridge. Sure, yeah. So you would actually walk into a store They would have a selection of mostly mediocre films for you to look at. The ones you were interested in would all be gone. And you would argue with your significant other and finally compromise on a movie that sounded the least boring. And you would pay for it. You would go home with it. And then I think something like 3 days, 4 days, maybe a week later, you would start accruing lots of late fees because you would have forgotten to return it. And eventually you'd go back to this Blockbuster and return it, and then maybe get another boring movie. That was the way things worked back then. It's
an interesting business model.
It was a caveman times, man. We were just banging on stones.
I'm surprised that did not last.
It's really shocking, really. I know, right?
Also, I wish I could go back into history and tell you always double stuffed Oreos. It's always double stuffed.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. That is always the answer. You are correct.
No, I love that story, and I think that so it's been like 15 years, right, that you've done just this astronaut guy.
Yep.
Was it like a Eureka moment when you made that first painting with the astronaut guy that this was like, all right, this is the thing that I'm going to be doing now forever?
Yes to the first half of your question, no to the second half of your question. It was absolutely a Eureka moment. Like, I knew I'd stumbled onto a pretty cool idea, and it was something that I wanted to do. I had zero idea I'd still be doing it much later and would have made, I recently painted my 300th astronaut. I had zero idea that was what was going to happen. And I also had no idea at the time. It was very accidentally clever. The astronaut figure, because it's so empty, even his suit is very reflective and this face mask is all black, and it's just, you can project so much into it. And I had no idea of any of that when I started. It just was kind of a cool idea. I remember in the early going thinking like, maybe I'll make some astronaut paintings, and then maybe I'll make some superhero paintings or something, or maybe I'll come up with another idea and make a few of those. So it was definitely a Eureka moment. I knew it was a cool idea, but I had no idea it was going to last nearly as long as it has, or be as sort of rich for exploration as it has.
That's cool. Yeah, and it's just like you were saying with like the future, like nobody can predict the future, and you imagine like 20 years from now you're going to be living on the moon, or 20 years from now you're going to be doing this kind of art. I think all those things are the same, and it's like if you worry too much about what you're gonna be as an artist, like who you're gonna, like what kind of statements you're gonna make, like exactly like where you're gonna be in your career, like you're always gonna be wrong.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like live in the present, I guess, and just like get to the work and then see what happens. Like see if this astronaut thing sticks, or see if this crazy idea you have sticks. Like just try it out and see what happens, and not worry too much about those future results. You know what I mean? Otherwise you'll drive yourself crazy, and you're probably gonna be wrong anyway. So
I remember when I was a student being very, very focused on this concept of style. I'm air quoting again. Artistic style. Like I really wanted a sophisticated style. I wanted like a unique style. And that's what I spent a lot of time thinking about. And I remember thinking like, where will I be down the road? What kind of artistic style will I have? And now, 15, 20 years later, I couldn't give a crap less about style. I mean, I think I have one, but it's just sort of happened by painting a lot. It just sort of, it came about. So I definitely agree. Like I eventually learned to just focus on the painting in front of you. Maybe think about the next couple of paintings that are coming down the line, but don't worry too much about where it's going. Just make the paintings that feel important to you in that moment. And if they feel important to you, then the chances are good they'll feel important to somebody else, and they'll also lead you to good places. But yeah, no, I totally agree. Like don't worry too much about where you're going to be in 5, 10, 20 years or whatever.
Right. Now, do you have like a personality for the astronaut guy? Because like, would you say it's you, or would you say it's like kind of like a faceless like person that the viewer can be?
Yeah, I mean, people ask me all the time, like, is that you in the astronaut suit? And the short answer is sure, that's me. But I hope that it's the way I paint it and the way I think about it is I want it to be the entry point for everybody who's looking at the painting. And I know that gets into sort of like artsy fartsy ideas, but I've had normal people who are not super artsy tell me that they felt the same way. Like having the astronaut in each painting, it's hard not to sort of slide into those shoes or astronaut boots, so to speak, and put yourself in that position. And that's kind of what I want people to do. I want people to feel like that the sense of exploration, the sense of looking at something for the first time, the sense of questioning things that maybe you take for granted. So, I don't think the astronaut itself has, I guess it's sort of I don't want to say persona of me, but it's more like an idea, an emotion, this idea of exploration, this idea of adventure, this idea of leaving whatever is comfortable for you and going out into the world and looking at things. And that's why I very clearly, like I said, I keep, in the very first paintings I did, you can actually see the astronaut's face through the face mask. And I very quickly realized that was not what I wanted to do. I didn't want you looking at the painting and be like, oh, hey, it's a white guy, or oh, hey, it looks like my friend Joe, or whatever. I wanted it to be just this sort of, obviously there's a person in there, but I didn't want it to be anything specific. I wanted to sort of be this idea, and hopefully you could easily put yourself in there and walk around. So I guess that's kind of what I'm going for.
Right. And now, very rarely, I don't think, well, there's been dinosaurs, of course, but there's never really been people, other people, right?
No, there's in the earlier work there was people. By early work, I mean first 5-10 years I was doing it because I've been doing it for a while. There are occasional people who pop up every now and again. Lately, in the past 5 or 6 years, as the work's gotten a little bit more mature, mature, air quoting, I paint Transformers, Ultron, and stuff like that. But as the work's gotten a little bit more developed, or my ideas got a little bit more solid, what I wanted to do, there's a lot less people, because I like the idea about these worlds being kind of empty, and I like it being very ambiguous whether people are still around. There's lots of signs of humanity. There's cities in the distance. There's trucks and cars that may be abandoned, may be in use. There's graffiti and things. Lots of signs of people. But I like keeping it kind of open-ended as to whether people are still around or not. And as to like whether or not the reason for them not being around might be because of the things that your astronaut is exploring too. That's like my favorite thing. Yeah. I like that mystery about it. And I've heard from other people who also I thought that might be annoying to people, but I hear from people now and again they like that sort of sense of mystery about the paintings. Yeah. So where does your inspiration come from? Like when you get like a pop culture like reference or something, like where is like the click? Where is the decision where you're like, okay, that's going to be something that I'm going to paint. Like that's something that I want my astronaut to explore. Are you watching TV? Are you reading? Or are you just kind of in the shower? Like when do those ideas pop up to you? And like when are you sure that this is a thing that you want to do? Well, so kind of all of the above. There's this idea of artistic inspiration, the artist, usually wearing a beret, with a pipe in their hand, staring at a blank canvas going, aha, I have this wonderful idea. And for me, that is never when inspiration strikes. By the time I'm staring at a blank canvas, I know within probably about 90% what I want to do with it, which kind of eliminates that whole like, oh God, what am I doing with this blank canvas? My ideas, often they come when I'm just sort of wandering around, like listening to music, walking along the street, I find very inspiring. Traveling, I find very inspiring, which at the time was a mystery to me, but now makes a lot of sense because it taps into that very feeling I'm trying to get at with my astronaut, where you're in an environment that you don't know and you're kind of exploring. Sometimes literally when I'm at the supermarket, I get these weird ideas. I keep a list of notes, little jots on my phone, where I'll write down snippets of ideas that I get while I'm walking around, and some of which are just totally stupid, and some of which turn into paintings. And certainly also while I'm watching movies and reading books and things like that, ideas come to me. Now, in recent years, I've sort of transitioned from having a bunch of discrete ideas to since I've been having more actual gallery shows over the past 5 years or so, and that pace has kind of accelerated. I'll come up with more groups of ideas. Like I'll have a whole theme that I know I kind of want to make, say, anywhere between 6 to 20 paintings about an idea, and have these be little sort of self-contained stories, which actually makes life a lot easier. You don't have to come up with 20 discrete ideas, and it's kind of fun to do deep dives into things like that. But as far as the pop culture references, I mean, I get emails from people all the time like, oh man, you should paint, I don't know, you should paint G.I. Joe, or you should paint Star Trek, or you should paint this or that. And I mean, it's cool because people are into my work. I like hearing things like that. But most of the vast majority of the time, I have to have a real personal connection to whatever the pop culture reference is. I'm not just going to slide a reference in there because, whatever, it was popular in the 80s, or it's like a thing to do. I've had some group show opportunities built around, movie theme. It just didn't, which I those are always fun, but didn't make sense in the context of my work. So I prefer to stick to things that, if it's an older reference, it's something that I grew up with and was important to me as a kid. If it's a more recent reference, it's something that, I feel really passionate about, is something that I think is really well done or clever or is important to me or has been influential to me, in my work. So those are the types of references I like to include. Although, I also include a lot of signs and billboards and, fast food and things like that in my work. And for me, those are more, I remember having a thought very early on when I was first starting to do these paintings, where I was walking down the street and I'd pass like a Starbucks, and I live in New England, so I'd pass a Dunkin' Donuts, and I'd pass a Gap, and I'd pass, at the time there were lots of Blockbusters, but they're not, they're gone. But I'd pass like a Taco Bell, and then I'd keep walking or driving, wherever. I get to the next light, and I'd look to my right, and there'd be a Starbucks and a Gap and a Dunkin'
Yeah.
and a Taco Bell, and then I hit the next block, and it's much the same. And I kind of kind of like those repeating backgrounds in old like Looney Tunes cartoons. And I kind of realized that was the kind of modern landscape we've been building for ourselves, was this sort of like collage of like Burger King signs and Taco Bell signs and Gap logos and things like that. That I really started thinking about that as the equivalent of like Cezanne out painting a mountain, was like me like looking at a Dunkin' Donuts sign. And so for me, those things are, it's less I have like it's not like I love Dunkin' Donuts or Pizza Hut or wherever, but like that just feels like our landscape, like the world we live in. And so like it's important to me to have those things appearing in the background, because that's just like, to me, those are so significant to the world we live in right now.
Right. That's like the kind of consumeristic future we've built for ourselves. Instead of living on the moon, we just have a Burger King on every block.
Yeah, we don't live on the moon, but you can get a whole meal for like $6 and change or whatever, and have it ready for you in 2 minutes, on any city block.
Who needs the moon with that,
Well, yeah, sure. I mean, what's the moon? Who knows what their fast food options are? They probably have their own thing going on. But
Well, that kind of brings up another point, like, because I think in today's society, like with all the conflict and uncertainty and just like confusing politics, I'll say,
yeah,
a lot of people probably feel like they're in one of your paintings, and I certainly do.
Yeah.
Like I look around, I'm just like, what is going on?
Yeah.
So I wonder, do you feel like an added responsibility to touch on like certain politics, like certain like buzzwords or certain things that are like, really in the news, like you said, maybe you don't have a personal connection with, but everybody else is talking about? And do you feel like you have to like make a political stance with your Astronaut?
Yes. Yes, I do. I had a lot of people over the last, 6 to 9 months say things to me like, oh, well, gosh, congrats, Scott. They were, I don't know if, I don't want to imply they were sarcastic about it, but they were like, wow, your work is like extra on the point now, like especially because I do a lot of post-apocalyptic stuff, a lot of, work touches on, climate change and things like that. And people are like, wow, it's your work is like extra, like it's like you're foretelling the future. And I always say like, thanks. That's, like I'm not excited that like some of the that my more grim painting, my post-apocalyptic paintings are like more on point now. Like, wow, great. I'd actually rather live in a future that was cheery and fun, and people could look at my paintings as this alternative world. So I don't feel fantastic about that, but I do feel like my work is tied into a zeitgeisty moment now, much more than it was even like a year ago. I think at the time I posted something on, out into the interwebs about as somebody who's been painting the future for a long time, I do feel like it's my obligation to say things about where I see the future going now, which feels much more uncertain and less great than it did, a while ago. I mean, it's always been a little bit up in the air. So I do feel an obligation to talk about that in a way that is maybe a little less fiction and is maybe more a little bit of a warning or as a reality or as a wake-up call. Mm-hmm. I never thought of my work as being too overtly political. up until recently. Like I said, I do talk about climate change and things like that, and I think there's political statements you can read into my work, but I didn't think of it as being like an explicit statement. I do feel like it would be remiss if I didn't talk about those things now in my work, especially now that I have through somehow I've built an audience of my. There are actually believe it or not, there are a lot of people who actually like my work, which is still a little surprising to me. But I've got followers on Instagram, on Facebook, and Twitter, and I feel like it's important to me to use, like, I have a voice now that I certainly didn't have 5-10 years ago. Like I didn't have that, and so yes, it's important to me to try to do something good with that voice, as opposed to just being like, hey, buy some more prints, which, by the way, listeners of this podcast, you should all buy more of my prints. But I would like to do more than that with my work if I can. Yeah, it just feels important.
Yeah. Well, go buy some prints, everybody.
Yes, also do that.
We'll have that linked up at yourcreativepush.com/Scott Listfield.
Yes, awesome.
Well, you mentioned before, like, the way this all kind of started was like coming home and like not feeling comfortable, kind of feeling like an alien. I wonder, do you still feel that way?
In some ways, yes. In other ways, I mean, in other ways, I'm much more comfortable in my own skin than I was back then. I'm certainly more comfortable doing adult things than I was. I can actually like make myself a passable dinner without without embarrassment and without involving a freezer and a microwave, although I still do that a lot. But I'm certainly better at being an adult. I'm much more comfortable in my own skin. I'm comfortable with who I am and my place in the world. But I still like getting that feeling of, this is new, this is exciting, this is different, this is a place where I don't feel comfortable. And that involves a lot of like traveling, going places you've never been, or even going places you have been, exploring, trying new things, even just like dumb crap like, going to a restaurant, ordering something off a menu that's like nothing you would ever like. Or like I ordered soft shell crab the other day, where I was like, I don't eat soft shell crab. What am I doing? That's kind of a dumb example, but
great example.
No, well, like food is actually a good example. Like eating things you've never, exploring different cultures through food, exploring different, if you can't afford to travel or whatever. Yeah, I still like getting at that feeling of, I've never done this before, and this is something new for me, and those experiences are still very inspiring to me. So yeah, I feel less like in my everyday life. I mean, I can go to the supermarket and buy Oreos just fine. I do still feel like that every now and again. And I think it's good to feel like that, because it's good not to take things for granted. It's good to look on things with a fresh eye, I think.
Absolutely. I mean, double stuffed Oreos are the best, but every once in a while, maybe try the holiday Oreo, switch it up, try new experiences.
They've got those pumpkin spice Oreos out probably, because we're entering September. So go buy them, I guess.
Yes. Well, no, I think you bring up a really good point for people too that are maybe lacking inspiration, or they they feel stuck. They feel like they've been doing the same thing, but like their heart is telling them they need to switch things up. Like we talk about, taking a different route to work, or thinking about things in a completely different way, trying to put yourself in a different situation, and then you start to shake things up. You start to think about things differently, and you start to figure out like where you're supposed to go next.
Absolutely. Yeah. When I was back in college, so like I said, I went to school in a pretty small town in New Hampshire, which was perfectly adequate for my needs for the first 3 years of school. And then I went off to Italy for a semester, and I came back, and I had all these great ideas, and I was making some paintings that were almost proto-astronaut painting. Like there was no astronaut in them, but the ideas were kind of percolating there. Mm-hmm. And then I just ran out of steam, and I got really frustrated my last, 4 or 5 months of college. And I knew it was because I was kind of done with this sort of small town. I needed to go out and explore a little bit more, but I couldn't do that. And then once I got out, the ideas sort of came fresh again. It's hugely important to, in any way you can, get out of your sort of everyday thing if you're feeling like you need more inspiration. Very important to do that.
Now, do you have any other things that have held you back in the past, or maybe hold you back now? You mentioned before, like when you were back in art school, like looking around and seeing everybody is, quote, better than you.
Yes.
Has that kind of dissipated, or do you have anything else that kind of holds you back on a daily basis?
That feeling is largely dissipated. Although I know a lot of people, even very successful artists still feel that way a lot. So I studied art. I was an art history minor, and I loved art and I loved art history. And it was hugely influential to me for a time, but I actually reached a point where that was a hindrance. I needed to kind of let go of all those historical artists who I was never going to quite live up to who they were and who just were kind of an overpowering force. I kind of had to go off and find my own voice, which is a super hard thing to do. But part of that was kind of letting that go. And it wasn't until much later that I let myself be inspired and influenced by, mostly now I consider them my peers, people who are working now. So that was kind of a surprising thing, because I thought, in school you're always like, learn more, get to know more artists. And I kind of I just really had to be on my own for a while. And I know for a lot of other people that can be very intimidating, especially if you're starting out or if you're in the early phases of doing artwork. It can actually be very hard to look at people who look super professional and be like, oh God, I'll never get there. And you can't let yourself think like that. My main barrier now is just time. I wish I had 1 million hours in a day. And people are like, oh, I wish there were like 30 hours a day. No, I wish there were like 1 million hours in a day. I just have so much I want and need to do, and it's never quite enough time. And kind of the story of, I've got lots of stories over the last 10 years, but a lot of it is, for me, finding ways to be more efficient in my studio and make paintings of the same quality or better in less time. So that's just sort of something I'm always kind of bumping up against. It's like, oh, I've got paintings to make, no time to do them. That's, to me, is the main sort of resistor. I thought that, so for 15 years, I worked as a full-time designer on top of my art career. And I reached a point where I walked away from that, and I've been painting full-time for the last about 2 years or so. I thought that a hindrance that I thought was going to be a real problem. I was actually reluctant to paint full-time for a long time. Well, I was reluctant because I thought I would go broke, but I also was really worried about running out of ideas. And people ask about it all the time, like, "Oh, are you worried about running out of ideas for what your astronaut could do?" And I was very worried about switching from whatever. In the last couple of years where I was working full time, I made 20, 25 paintings a year, and it's very different to switch into this mode where you're making a lot more than that. This is actually hopefully good news for your listeners, that I actually found the opposite. Like the more and more I got into it, and I was already very into making astronaut paintings, like, don't get me wrong, but the more I did it and the more it became even like a full-time job and a full-time passion and everything else, I have more and more ideas and more sort of worlds the astronaut can go explore. So that was something I was very nervous about being a sort of barrier. I was really worried, like, oh God, I've got a show coming up and I'm just going to have no idea what to do for anything. And I've much to my surprise, for the most part, you hit a dry spell every now and again, but for the most part, that really hasn't been the case, which is reassuring, I think.
Yeah, that is reassuring.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and when you were a full-time designer and trying to balance that with, all these ideas that you had for your paintings, would you have any advice for people that, like, I have a full-time job and a lot of people listening have a full-time job. Sometimes that's not even anything to do with your creative passion. How did you kind of balance that?
It took a long time for me to get into the rhythm of doing it. I've been painting astronauts for like 17, 18 years now, which is a long time. But after the first 5 years or so, I had maybe 12 or 13 paintings to my name. It really took me a while to get into the habit of painting on top of work, because it's like most people know, it's very hard to do. But I liken it to, people get up, at 5 a.m. and go jogging every day. That sounds horrible to me.
Me too.
I like jogging every
day.
But like getting up every morning, like in the wintertime to go running, just sounds dreadful. But people do it, A, because they like running, they have a passion for it, but B, because you get into this rhythm. And if you fall out of that rhythm, you don't feel good. Like you feel like you're missing something. And it took me a long time to get there, but I got into this rhythm of painting. Like every day I come home from work, I have dinner, I hang out with my wife and my dog for a little bit, and then I go in the studio. And that studio becomes like a reprieve. It's like, oh, whew, thank God I'm in the studio. This is going to be awesome. And, when you're sitting on the couch and you're tired from work, you kind of think, oh God, I don't know, do I want to go in there? But the second I'd walk in the studio, all those feelings would just evaporate. And that feeling of being tired would just go away. And I'd be like, oh, I feel awake. I feel happy. This is where I want to be. And I know for everybody, that's not always the case. There are frustrations in the studio. But for me, it became this place, like I was always awake, alert, happy to go in there. It was always a counterbalance because I needed that. Especially in the early days when like I didn't have any sort of an art career, and my regular career was fine, but like I needed to be an artist. Like that was just really pivotal to. I reached a turning point maybe 4 years out of school where I wasn't doing very much, and I could have just stopped making art, and it would have been fine. And I think a lot of people do that, but I asked myself, is that something I'd be okay with? And I realized the answer was no. Like I wouldn't be okay with not being an artist. And so I kind of redoubled my efforts at that point. And not like the prestige, whatever perceived prestige or pretentiousness of being, oh, I'm an artist, I put on my beret or whatever. No, it was just, to me, I needed to create something that was very personal. I had stories I wanted to tell, and then if I didn't tell them, I wasn't sure anybody else would. Yeah, so for me, it became about the routine, but it also became about telling a story, and it became about this sort of passion that I had for painting. Like I really enjoyed the process of painting. And so, if I were to give people advice who are struggling with that, it's to just get into a rhythm of it, even if it's like half an hour a day, 20 minutes a day, whatever. And I know, people who have kids too, like that's just, I can't even, like there's so much going on. It's hard to carve out even a little bit of time, but try to find something, even if it's minimal, to do your own personal work in. And then, if you're struggling with it, remember what it is that you're passionate about, right? I'm not a professor or anything, but I like talking to art students. I get called into schools every now and again. I love talking to students, especially students who are seniors, because I remember so vividly what it's like to be that feeling of like frustration at the end of your art school career, and that feeling of like impending doom of like, what do I do when I get out? How will I keep this going? I remember that very, very well. And what I always tell them is like, because they're frustrated with what their professors are telling them, they feel like they have to do things. And it's like, once you walk out those doors, nobody's going to tell you have to do anything. You can kind of do whatever you want. And that can be kind of freeing, but it can also be really, really freaking scary. But what you're left with at the end of the day, either you're going to make art or you're not going to make art. But if you make it, it's not going to be somebody's telling you have to do it. And it's not because you have to pass a class. It's going to be because you really, really want to. And it's because you've got something you want to say or something you're really passionate about. And it's those things you need to focus on, even if they feel dumb. Like when I first started painting astronauts and I started painting dinosaurs, I'm not going to lie, a big part of why I was doing it is because it felt like the stupidest thing possible to do. It was like none of my professors, and who, if any of them are listening, you guys did a great job. Thank you very much. You guys have been supportive of my career. But at the time, it was like, all I can think of is them looking at me painting. I remember I painted Chewbacca once in one of my early paintings, and I was like, there is nobody who's like, that's a great idea, paint Chewbacca. Like, it just seemed like the dumbest thing, but I really wanted to paint Chewbacca. Like, I desperately wanted it. And I remember looking over my shoulder, like, there was nobody telling me, no, don't paint Chewbacca. And I painted Chewbacca, and like, people were like, oh, that's pretty cool, you painted Chewbacca. And I was like, yeah, it is, isn't it? And it was so freeing and fun and liberating to paint whatever the heck I wanted to. That's the thing, that passion is gonna be what keeps you going. So if you're frustrated, just find the thing that is fun to you, even if it seems stupid, even if it seems like it's not the thing that you should be doing, not the part of the artwork that feels important. Do that, and if you're blocked, if you're frustrated or whatever, let that be the thing that guides you through whatever. Because like, if you're not having fun, you're not going to keep doing it. You're just not. And if you want to keep doing it, have fun. I don't know. It's dumb, but that's, so many people reach those roadblocks, and it, the artwork starts feeling like work, and then they stop doing it. And it's like, well, yeah, if you're not having fun, then that's what's going to happen.
Right. I mean, that's the whole point of being a creative person, is to be able to do like the thing that's in your head. And when you start to, I mean, of course, like there's ways to make money, and like that's fine to like do what other people ask you to do for money, like totally fine. But like when it comes down to like being being a creative person, like you have this thing that's in your head that needs to get out. Like that's the whole point, is that the fact that you are able to do that thing, you're able to like get that message out, to tell that story that's in your head that you're afraid that nobody else is going to be able to tell. And so to really treat that sacred time, basically, like to treat that time that you can find every day and get into that rhythm, like you said, and treat like the studio time like a sanctuary, not like this like job, like that you have to get this thing done. It's like enjoy that time and say what you want to say during that time. Yeah.
The other big thing I would say is have patience, which I was not even slightly a patient person in my younger years, not even a little bit. And I'm now very, well, no, I'm not always patient, but you know, in certain areas, I'm very patient. And what I mean by that is you're going to hit frustrations and you're going to want to say, screw this. Like, what am I doing here? You need to just keep working through it. And like I said, it was a slog for me those first 5, 6, 7 years, whatever I was doing. Like the paintings came slow. They were hard. I was not in my comfort zone. Like it was not easy for me to paint astronauts. Like they were kind of clunky paintings. But I just kind of kept doing it. And I finally reached the point where like they don't feel like I feel comfortable. Like that is my comfort zone. But it took a while to get there. But don't feel intimidated. Like I remember some people being like, "Well, you're not going to make a great painting till you're 60," and it's like that's a terrible attitude. Like don't. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying like it can take some time. Be okay doing things that are mediocre if that's what it takes to get you through it. Okay, like just do it and then move on. Be okay, like putting it aside and be like, I'm going to move on to the next one. And the next one will be a little better. And the next one will be a little better. And then and before you know it, you're like, oh wait, I'm actually okay at this. That's just kind of how things happen.
Absolutely. Patience. It's a virtue.
It is. And it's not an easy one, but it is. Yeah. If you feel like you have something that you want to say in your artwork, like you feel like you have a voice, which is what I always felt like. I was like, in my early days, I was like, I'm not sure I'm a great painter really, but I felt like I had something unique and different I wanted to say. If anybody wants to talk to me about like building a career or doing the business side of art, like that's a thing I've failed over and over and over again to the point where I'm sort of somewhat successful at it. So like, hey, I'm happy to answer questions about that kind of thing. But none of it happened the way I thought it would. For me, I had a vision that I thought was pretty unique and singular. And when I first started doing it, nobody gave a crap. And that's fine. That's fine. Like, it gets a little depressing. But like my wife has always been a voice of support for me. She's always had faith in me. I've had a few good friends who've always supported what I did and had faith, not just supported, but had like faith in my message, what I was doing. And I personally have always, whether it was well-founded or not, I always had faith in myself that not that I could be a great successful painter, but I always had faith in my own voice, that I had something worth saying. And if you have that, I really do believe this. If you have that faith in yourself, that you're saying something worth saying, eventually there's going to be somebody else who also feels that same way. There's going to be somebody else who gets what you're saying and who has those same thoughts. And if you keep doing it, you're going to find those people. And I wouldn't have thought necessarily that's the way to build a career out of art. Because like I said, when I was back in the day, I was literally painting in a walk-in closet. I was painting these goofy astronauts and nobody saw them other than people who came over to my house and was like, okay, whatever Scott's doing is weird. It's not like I just sort of jumped out and like all of a sudden I've got, 10,000 followers on Instagram and everybody loves my work. That's just not, it wasn't that way. It was everything starts quirky and weird and singular and whatever. But if you really believe in that, you're going to find other people who do. And eventually you'll wake up one day and be like, oh, hey, wait a minute. There are other people who are following what I'm doing. And then there are other people who are buying what I'm doing. And then, hey, I'm showing in galleries or whatever. I'm selling work. If you make work that's really deeply personal, there's going to be somebody else who also likes what you're doing.
Yeah, of course, like work on your art and like work on your message and figure out exactly what it is that you want to say.
Yeah.
But then, at some point it's time to take those things out of the closet and to come out of the closet and to like post that work and to share it and to like promote your message too.
That's hugely important. Yeah. So like, back when I was starting, Facebook and Instagram weren't really a thing. Nowadays it's so easy to get your work out there. I would say that's, It's super. It's easily one of the 3 or 4 most important things to do as an artist is get your work out there, get eyeballs in front of it, and it can be a scary thing to do. And you don't, if you don't want to do it right away, that's fine. But it's hugely important to do that too.
It's one of the things of like 2001 Space Odyssey. We were talking about that before. And like, yeah, they could not have predicted that, how easy it is for artists or for anybody to get their message out there, to connect with other people and to build an audience.
I like to tell, younger artists who can't, who've grown up in a world with, phones in your pockets and everything else, that like, if you had told, 1999 me, or any artist really, in 2000 or whatever, that there would be some vehicle where you could immediately disseminate your work to tens of thousands of people. My first question was, how many thousands of dollars can I pay you to get this thing? I will gladly do it right now. And the fact that it is free is just freaking crazy, right? It's an amazing tool for artists. It's really just, it's even a generation ago, nobody would have conceived that was the thing you could do. The other hugely important thing to do, especially if you're younger or if you're just getting started, is to find a community, find other people whose work you like and who hopefully like your work. And that was a hard thing to do 20 years ago. You'd have to really hoof it. You have to go to, go walk around galleries, go to wherever, and I mean, you should still do some of that stuff too, but like, it's so much easier now to find people who live all around the world who do work that you like and who hopefully will like your work, it's really even to me now, I've been doing this a long time and I've had some success in my career, thanks to whoever. It's really amazing to me now to have somebody online be like, oh my God, I just found your work. I love it. Like, that's amazing to get that little sort of boost every day, hearing people say things like that. So, go find a community, get your work out there.
That's what it's all about.
Mm-hmm.
Scott, it's time for the final push.
Okay.
And this is where I ask you to reach through the microphone and grab the shoulder of one of the listeners that you've already really inspired today, and just give them your final words of advice and really push them to pursue their own creative passions.
Okay. Wow. Well, first of all, I hope it's not creepy that I'm virtually touching you through this microphone. I hope you're cool with that. I feel like I've said this like already, and maybe I'll just reiterate it. But anytime if you're feeling frustrated, or if you don't know what to do, I assume you're listening to this podcast because you have some sort of interest in art. Always go back to that thing that got you interested in the first place. Like, what it is about art that you like doing, even if it feels stupid or minor, or even if it's like, I like that feeling of a brush on paper, or I like arranging my colored pencils, or I like clipping things out of a magazine to collage, or whatever it is, or I like being inspired by colors. Go back to that. Every time you're feeling frustrated or whatever, go back to that, channel that, because it's going to be the thing that you love, that you feel passionate about. It's a thing that makes you, whatever the heck that is, that gets you to do art. So just keep going back to that well over and over again. And hopefully it won't run dry. And keep making stuff. Even if you're not feeling 100% into it, keep making stuff. I mean, don't force yourself too much. Don't do things that you really, sometimes it's good to do things you don't want to do. But just keep going. And feel good about it. At the end of the day, making art is something you should feel good about.
Absolutely. Scott, thank you so much for coming on the show. I love your art. Astronauts and dinosaurs are two of my favorite things. So I just love your message and what you're doing, and you found a really cool niche, and I hope that you do it for another 15, 16, 17 years, or for the rest of your life.
Well, I hope so too. And thanks for having me on. I like talking. I mean, I know a lot of artists don't love talking about their work. I always like talking about my work. And I know that's a little bit egotistical, but a part of it is because I had such a roundabout, bouncy way of a lot of successes and failures over the years, and a lot of fits and starts. And I hope that people can learn from what I've done. And again, when I hear people are inspired by my work, it's really there's no greater thing you can hear as an artist. Even maybe, hey, here's $1 million. That would be pretty cool too. But to hear people are inspired by my work it's amazing. It really is.
Yeah, and going back to what you were saying about the importance of community, I think that's really important too. And I think it is important to talk about your own work too for people that are even just starting out, because that being able to have a conversation about it will help you to figure out exactly like why it is that you do what you do, or why you care about like what you care about and like why it's important to like bring it out into the world. And it can really help to make that kind of thesis statement of your art more concrete, like to establish yourself, to be able to talk about it. Because it's really hard to find like-minded people that can give a back and forth and that you can kind of collaborate with. So I think it's so important for people to reach out in real life or on the internet and find people that they can talk to about it, about their own work. And I don't think it's egotistical at all. It's the way that you figure out what you care about.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I still, that's again one of the reasons why I like talking about my work, because even 15 years on, I'll be talking about my work and I'll realize something. And I'm like, oh, I can't believe I've never thought of that before. You learn new things about yourself every time you sort of try to express what it is you're doing and what you're interested in. Yeah.
So for people that have not checked out Scott yet, you can find him at his website, which is astronautdinosaur.com. On Instagram, he is Scott Listfield. On Facebook, Scott Listfield Artist. On Twitter, Scott Listfield. And we'll have all of that, as well as everything else we talked about today, linked up at the show notes page at yourcreativepush.com/Scott Listfield. Scott, thanks again, man.
Thank you so much. This has been great.
My thanks again to Scott, not only for coming on the show, but for dealing with some technical issues that we had. I got the blue screen of death. My computer died during the middle of the interview. I was able to save most of what we had talked about before, but then he held on while my computer restarted, did updates, and hung on the line for me while I was panicking and waiting for my computer to restart. So thank you so much, Scott, for sticking through it with me. But I just want to remind you all to do the thing that you think is fun. The thing that you're most passionate about, like Scott said, the thing that brought you to this creative passion in the first place. Do it and just see how it feels. Even if you're scared of what other people are going to think, even if you're scared of people looking over your shoulder and judging you, don't worry about those people. They're not going to tell you that you can't do it. And maybe after you actually do it, they'll look over your shoulder and you'll be very pleasantly surprised by their reaction. And who knows where that will lead you. Maybe it will give you another 15 to 20 years of continuing to explore that thing that is fun to you. And going along with that, if you have this thing that is fun to you, this thing that you truly believe in, or this thing that you believe deserves further exploration, continue to believe in yourself and that message that you believe in and keep putting it out there. Like Scott said, eventually you will find those other people that also believe in the exact same thing, the other people that want to explore that exact same thing. They're guaranteed to be out there. So keep doing it, keep plugging away, and keep putting it out there, and they will find you. Just be patient. One of Scott's final messages, be patient. It will not happen all at once. It's going to be a series of triumphs, of failures, of doubt, of joy. It's going to be all those emotions, but you have to stick through every single one of them so that you can last, so you have an opportunity to make an impact on all of those people. On our next episode, we have Bill Logan. Bill is an artist, a writer, a rug maker, a fly fisherman. He does it all. And he is also one of the sweetest guys I've kind of interacted with in a long time. He's somebody who truly believes in the creative process of developing a creative life for yourself and pursuing the things that you care about most, much like Scott today. If you want to find out more about Bill, you can check out his website at billloganart.com. Or we'll have that linked up in today's show notes page at yourcreativepush.com/257. Also, before I let you go, I wanted to thank Sean Johnson and Susan Guevara, who responded to my call to action yesterday when I asked if you would consider becoming patrons on Patreon for the show. I so appreciate the needed support. And if you want to join Susan and Sean and everybody else who has already become a patron, head to yourcreativepush.com/Patreon. But that is all I've got for you today, so hopefully you were inspired to go and get your work done. So go and get it done, and we will be here for you next time if you need the push again. I love you all so much. Go get some amazing work done, and we will see you next time. Bye. Never miss a push. Head to yourcreativepush.com/subscribe to find the easiest way for you to subscribe to the podcast.